This is the first in a series of talks I shall be giving on great works of philosophy, the basic ideas. And I will start with the Analects of Confucius, which is a good place for me to start, given that I have written and published an article on Confucius and Hegel. Yes, that's true. You heard correctly. And it's in a rather obscure Russian journal, but if anybody is wanting to read it, I can send them a PDF. Confucius, 551 to 479 BC. The Analects is a work in ethics, political philosophy, epistemology, first transcribed late 6th, early 5th century BC. Its principal ideas are Gen, the ideal relationship among human beings, is the perfect virtue of men and women. Man and woman is basically close to Gen by his very nature, or her very nature, but his or her action should be controlled by Li, the rules of propriety. The Chuntu, or ideal man or woman, I'm trying to keep it updated here, is one who practices Gen in accordance with Li, or Lai, I'm not sure how that's pronounced. Consequently, he or she treasures and seeks the Tao, the right way. Confucius, to whom most of the sayings in the Analects are ascribed, was a descendant of an influential family of the state of Lu in the present-day Eastern Chinese province of Shantung. His family name was Kong. His own names were Chiu and Chungni. Later he was known as Kung Fu Chu, meaning Master Kung, out of respect. At the time of his birth, his family was already in reduced circumstances, but he could boast of a long line of illustrious ancestors, dating all the way back to pre-Chu dynasty times. Because of Confucius's fame, his family history is perhaps the most complete and extensive genealogy in the world. Today, a man named Kong Tiching, officially recognized as the 77th generation descendant of Confucius, still lives in Taiwan. Orphaned at an early age, Confucius went to work while still in his teens. He held a number of minor posts in the government and in the employ of the nobility. His service record and his self-cultivation soon won for him wide recognition. Students gathered around him for instruction in ethics, literature, the art of government service. He was particularly respected for his knowledge of ancient rituals. Among his followers were men, presumably mostly men, I suppose, of diverse interests and temperaments. As myth and legend grew around this historical Confucius through the years, the biographical details of his life make the story of the ancient sage anything but monotonous. Confucius is said to have had to put up with one student who was too stingy to let his master borrow his umbrella. Consequently, Confucius was drenched in the rain at least once. Confucius, so the legend says, had constantly to restrain a second student whose hot temper involved himself and his master in frequent difficulties. Confucius is believed to have had a narrow escape from a third disciple whose reaction against his master's ceaseless moralistic admonitions amounted to a murderous intent. Fortunately, I don't have any students like that. Confucius divided his time among lecturing to his students, editing, reading materials for his students, trying to persuade the men in government to adopt his ideas. If he failed in the last, he certainly succeeded remarkably well in the first two tasks, as his Analects, the Lunyu, and its lasting influence testify. Being a collection of remembered dialogues recorded by his disciples and their pupils, there is clearly a question about the accuracy of the statements in the Analects. In addition, the extremely terse style of these dialogues lends itself to a variety of interpretations. However, upon a careful perusal of these sayings, many key ideas of the Confucian system emerge with clarity. Of the central cluster of ideas that are discernible in Confucian thought, the idea is Gen, or perhaps the greatest in importance. Gen is the foundation of the Confucian ethics because Gen stands for the ideal relationship among human beings. The etymological significance of the Chinese character Gen yields a key to this idea. The symbols that form this character mean two human beings, hence the suggestion of the ideal relationship between any two human beings. Gen suggests gentility, magnanimity, humanity, goodness of character, and benevolence. The last sense is the one most frequently used to translate this term. In short, Gen is the perfect virtue of human beings. It is the only road to the peace and harmony of a society. He or she who embraces the principle of Gen will treat people gently and humanely, and for him or her, everything will go well. In answering his disciples' questions on the existence and functions of Gen, Confucius stressed the importance not only of internalizing the principles of Gen to make them a part of man's natural disposition, but also of putting them into daily practice. He wanted his students to practice courtesy, magnanimity, good faith, diligence, and kindness everywhere and all the time. He came close to advocating an infinite compassion when he summed up his own exposition with a succinct command. To practice Gen is to love mankind, humankind, universally. Most frequently, Confucius emphasized that Gen was not a lofty metaphysical abstraction beyond the comprehension of the ordinary person. On the contrary, he insisted that Gen lay close at hand for everyone to grasp. The difficulty, as he saw it, was that few people could remain firm for long. Even among his distinguished disciples, he mentioned only one who succeeded in practicing Gen with constancy. One detects a note of earnestness that verges on religious fervor when Confucius speaks of the importance of Gen. With unmistakable clarity, he asserts that good men sacrifice their lives in order to maintain Gen, and that never would they alter Gen in order to survive any crisis. In this light, the Confucius Principles of Gen become more than relative standards of desirable social behavior. They are notions of absolute right and justice. But Confucius explains the seeds of these notions are not to be found outside man or woman's basic nature. Without anywhere giving a clear statement on his view of man or woman's nature, Confucius nevertheless reveals his assumption that men and women are basically the same and that direct expressions of the original nature of humans approach much closer to Gen than any affectation could. There was only one condition that Confucius insisted upon. Any direct expression of one's own nature would have to be restrained by Li, the rules of propriety, in order to adhere to the principles of Gen. Strictly speaking, the rules of propriety, the li, taken literally, could mean the etiquette, good form, or decorum, but clearly Confucius uses this term to mean more than mere outward expressions of formality. As an expert and an authority on ancient rites, Confucius preferred to have his students look beyond the music and pomp, the jade and silk and other features usually accompanying the rituals. In the Analects, he stresses the essence of li as the distinguishing quality of man and woman, without which man or woman and wild animals would be the same, and human society would cease to exist. He also tells his own son to study li, because if man and woman does not know li or li, he does not know how to behave like a man or woman. Li consequently is held as the evidence of man's civilization. Li is essential to sophisticated, cultured, and orderly living, which is the central aim of the Confucian social teachings. With li, man and woman can tame the wild animal in him or herself, and make him or herself a better member of society. In more than one statement, Confucius suggests that psychological use of li to bring calm and poise to man and woman at critical moments. Li is the Confucian prescription to save society from chaos and disorder. True to his status as a self-appointed bearer of traditional culture, Confucius does not spare any effort to impress his students with the importance of rituals. He himself would not eat unless the meal was presented and the seat arranged in proper manner. He would not walk on foot when he kept company with the dignitaries. He would not look, listen, speak, or move until he was sure his every action was in accordance with the rules of propriety. Li. Indeed, his own sayings and other statements about him in this book show us a man of meticulous care for proper manners. One feels that Confucius purposely did so to dramatize the cultural heritage of his state of Lu, which was closely linked to the Zhou dynasty. In his philosophy, Confucius champions a revival of the Zhou institutions, which in his political vision represent a golden past. Of course, it must be remembered that Confucius holds the spirit, the appropriateness, and the sincerity behind the rites above the formalities. He instructs his students to observe simplicity, not lavish display as the general principle of all rites, and to ascertain the genuine sentiment behind any ritual observance, rather than a mere physical presence of etiquette. The spirit of li, according to Confucius, obtains only when the man or woman practicing li has Gen. Here the two Confucian ideas come together to form the basis for the cult of Chuntu. Originally, Chuntu meant no more than the son of the Lord. Its more extensive use acquired for it the broader meaning of any man of good breeding. In the repeated appearance of this term in the Confucian statements, the elements of good breeding or family origin is no longer stressed, and Chuntu becomes simply good man, or the best of men, in contradistinction with Cao Gen, small man or petty man. The sense of the term in the Analects can also be quite adequately expressed as the superior man, in contrast to the inferior man. Confucius paints in Chuntu a picture of the ideal man. This perfect man has a thorough understanding of Gen and constantly practices it. He acts according to li or li, and the rules of propriety are so much a part of his nature that he can never violate them. His uprightness, or the expressions of his general nature, is perfectly blended with a proper amount of refinement, so that he is neither pedantic nor rustic. In dealing with others, he is warm-mannered, has a will of steel and his appearance is always calm because his Gen keeps him from anxieties. His wisdom guards him against perplexities, his courage dispels any possible fear. While the petty-minded people think of profit, he, the Chuntu, is always mindful of what is right. He may not possess much technical knowledge about details, but his mind is capable of grasping what is essential and significant. Above all, the Chuntu treasures and seeks the Tao. The Confucian Tao is vastly different from the Tao of mystic Taoism. Confucius speaks of the Tao of the ancient sage kings, meaning the way to an ideal government and society, and of the Tao of a virtuous man, meaning the right way of being a man. At times, Confucius treats the word Tao as another name for righteousness and sagacity. As he does with Gen, Confucius also speaks of Tao with occasional outbursts of pious feeling. Thus we hear him declare, "He who hears of Tao in the morning may die content at night." In these instances, Confucius does come close to expressing a religious dedication. On the whole, Confucius's silence on the supernatural is eloquent. In the Analects, he does not defend nor does he attempt to destroy the prevailing ideas about the world of the spirits. Instead, he unequivocally instructs his disciples to keep their minds on the affairs of men and women and not to be bothered by questions about the spirits. He informs them that they must first learn enough about life before they inquire into life hereafter, and he himself throughout his life remained too busy studying this world to deal with the other world. When his student asks him about the relationship between the rites and the spirits, Confucius's answer is that since sincerity is the essence of the rituals, one must conduct the sacrificial rites to one's ancestors as if they were present, and to the spirits also as if they were present. Beyond this, so says Confucius, one should not go. It is enough to respect the spirits and to stay away from them. Small wonder that one of his disciples declares his disappointment in trying to learn Confucius's exposition on heaven's ways. Confucius may be suspected of dodging the question. He may also be suspected of having no formulated ideas about the spirits, but he cannot be accused of total silence on the question of heaven, for in many passages in this book, Confucius refers to heaven sometimes as an invincible moral force, and at other times as a supreme being, willful and purposeful. Heaven to Confucius is the supreme being that decides in favor of the moral and the right, and Confucius envisages himself as having been commissioned by the heavenly authority to perpetuate the sage king's way on earth. So he declares when his life is threatened by the people of Kuang, "If heaven is not going to let this culture decline, what can the people of Kuang do to me?" On another occasion of distress, Confucius comforts his friends by saying, "Heaven has created this virtue in me. What can Huan-Tu do to me?" That Confucius views heaven's will as always in favor of the good and always beneficial is further evinced in his statement about the regularity of the seasons and the thriving of myriad creatures. The statement has been taken by many students of Confucianism as a proof of Confucius' belief in the spontaneity of a universal amoral force that is omnipotent. This view could be correct, but if one judges by the majority of Confucius' remarks concerning heaven, the force of the foregoing statement still tends to describe heaven as a beneficent force that works benevolently without elaborate explanations. Heaven's Tao in Confucian terms, is heaven's way or heaven's will. This will is supreme and above man and woman's interference. If Confucius' use of the term heaven is perfectly consistent, then heaven's will should also be moral and in favor of the good. Here another Confucian term is introduced, the Ming. Ming could mean either a command or a destiny. When it appears in connection with heaven as heaven's Ming, it usually means heaven's command or heaven's will. When it appears alone, Ming could mean fate or destiny. What makes Confucius' position on heaven's will unclear is his statement that if the way, Tao, is to prevail, it is fate, Ming, and if the way is to fail, it is also fate, Ming. If this is the same Ming as heaven's command, then heaven may not always be intent on making the great way prevail. This idea of what is generally understood as Confucian fatalism, in other words, fate as a shadowy necessity beyond the comprehension and control of human beings, also appears in Confucian thought. Enough is said in the Analects to illuminate some other Confucian ideals with regard to social and political institutions. The importance of the family as the microcosm of society is clearly implied when Confucius reminds his students to practice filial piety within the family before trying to learn how to read and write well. The significance of filial piety in the Confucian system, as seen in the Analects, however, is not as great as is generally believed. In his book, Confucius describes this virtue as important because a man or a woman respectful towards his parents is not likely to violate the law and order of society, also because to be thankful to one's parents is a good sentiment that should be encouraged. But to uphold filial piety as the supreme human virtue is not Confucius' intent in this book. Rather, it is later developed in the Confucian school of thought, elaborated and reinterpreted by the Confucian commentators on these texts. Confucius himself does not preach total blind obedience to one's parents. He sees the virtue of a son shielding his sheep-stealing father, but he also teaches the son to remonstrate mildly but persistently with his erring father. As an educator, Confucius was equally earnest in teaching his students regardless of their social status and family origins. He is believed in the equal teachability of men, but he recognized the difference in intellect and talent amongst men and women. In the Analects, he accepts those who are born with knowledge as the best and those who learn after industrious study as the second type of mind. Nowhere in this book does Confucius suggest that everybody is born socially equal and is entitled to the right to rule himself. He urges the ruler to learn the right way to govern. He urges his students to learn to be the best ministers possible in order to assist the ruler. Confucius' view of the function of the government is that government must rule by moral excellence, a view that anticipates the whole political philosophy of Mencius. Confucius' remark about men and women born with knowledge is extremely provocative, but unfortunately, the Analects does not yield any adequate exposition on Confucius' view of knowledge. In discussing how to study, Confucius acknowledges that his own intention to observe and commit to memory what is observed, because he confesses that he cannot do anything without knowing about it first. When these statements are examined together, Confucius does hint at the possibility that some people are born with knowledge, hence these people can act spontaneously without the effort of learning how to act and without being aware of their knowledge. But Confucius carefully declines the company of people of such super-intellect, and he admits that the source of his knowledge is observation, and intensive study. He also rules out the attainment of knowledge through meditation without the aid of books, because once he tried to think the whole day without eating and the whole night without sleeping, but nothing came of it. Furthermore, he does not separate the attainment of knowledge from action and practice. More important than the relation between action and knowledge is the exact identification of name with actuality. According to the Confucian teachings, the times were chaotic and the social order was confused. Hence Confucius urged the king to behave like a king and the minister to act as one of his rank should. If the name is not correctly applied, says Confucius, then language is no longer a medium of communication. Consequently, nothing can be accomplished, and men will not even know where to put their hands or feet. From a moralistic start with a practical aim, the Confucian doctrine of rectification of names developed into a serious effort to define terms. Confucius's concern with this matter reveals his underlying assumption that the name is not just a representation of a thing, but is the very essence of the thing itself. The germ of this idea can be found in pre-Confucian thought in China's high antiquity, but Confucius's effort has added significance to this idea and made it an important development in Chinese philosophy. In spite of its brevity and limited bulk, the Analects remains throughout the centuries the most authentic and rewarding source for the study of Confucius, a man, and his thought. In addition to the key ideas of original Confucianism, the book also illumines with certain aspects of life in ancient China. The fragments of dialogues between Confucius and a few political leaders show their role the intellectuals played in a society where values were undergoing dramatic change. The dialogues also reveal how totally without restraint the states vied for supremacy in a power struggle that followed the collapse of an ancient feudal order. The fact that certain key statements in the Analects have been interpreted in different ways has certainly contributed to the survival of the Confucian system. There is something in this book for everyone, from the most radical to the most conservative, if he searches hard for it. Indeed, much has been read back into the Confucian teachings, and what Confucius did actually teach has been, as a result, distorted. In spite of differences of interpretation, it seems important to note that Confucius valued most highly an orderly, peaceful, and harmonious society. To this goal he channeled all his thought and teaching. His Tao was the way to achieve this ideal. His Tei, or virtue, was his claim that he had been invested with the knowledge of the way. His Wen, refinement, cultural heritage, was the heritage of institutions prevailing in an imaginary golden past derived from the ancient texts. To be sure, Confucius insisted that society would not be peaceful if each individual man did not behave properly according to his social station. This meant that for Confucius the individual was important, but only insofar as he or she could help to bring about peace and harmony in society. If Confucius speculated on the position of man and woman in the universe, or dealt with other metaphysical matters, there was no sufficient evidence in this book. End of my first talk. I don't know what I'll be talking about next, but I am open to requests if anybody would like to suggest anything. Philosophical related, of course. I'm not here to give you marriage guidance or anything like that. But anyway, have a nice day.